Between 1866 and 1882, Jesse James transformed from a teenage Civil War guerrilla fighter into America's most feared outlaw, leaving a trail of blood, bank robberies and train heists that turned him into a legend. Utterly devoid of fear and with no more compunction about cold-blooded murder than eating breakfast, he made his life a perpetual revenge against those who had defeated his beloved South. Here's what it was really like to be the most mythical outlaw of the American West. Before we get started, if these stories help you sleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. And I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in New Zealand listen to history stories to sleep? So, we're going back to the Wild West tonight. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. Your eyes snap open to darkness. It's that moment just before dawn in Missouri, 1866. The farmhouse creaks around you. Outside, a rooster hasn't yet started his morning complaints. Your chest aches from a bullet that's still lodged in your right lung. It's been there for 2 years, and doctors say it'll stay there forever. It hurts when you breathe deep. It hurts when the weather changes. It just plain hurts. Lying there, you flex your fingers, feeling for the revolver that's never more than an arm's reach away. Not like now, where the scariest thing under your bed might be a dust bunny. Back then, under your bed might be a Union soldier waiting to slit your throat. You're Jesse James. You're 18 years old, and you're about to become the most wanted man in America. When the Civil War ended in 1865, it didn't really end for you. How could it? You grew up on a hemp farm in Missouri with your older brother Frank and little sister Susan. Your daddy Robert died in the California gold fields when you were just 3, leaving your mama Zerelda to raise you alone. And damn, did she raise you with Southern pride. Remember that pain, you can almost hear her saying after Union soldiers raided your family farm, hung your stepfather from a tree until he nearly died and whipped you, a 15-year-old kid. Remember what they did to us. You remember, oh boy do you remember, those Union Jayhawkers came through Missouri like a plague of locusts, burning, stealing, killing. They turned your world upside down and now the war's over and everyone's just supposed to, what? Shake hands and forget? Hold up, let me paint you a picture of what Missouri was like during the Civil War. This wasn't like the neat battlefield lines you might imagine. This was neighbour against neighbour, ambushes at midnight, your childhood friend suddenly becoming the guy who might burn your house down while you sleep. Missouri was officially a Union state, but its heartbeat Confederate, and that split turned the place into a bloody mess. Think about it this way. You'd go into town for supplies and you didn't know who was who. The wrong word to the wrong person, that could get you killed. You talk like a southern boy, someone might say in a general store, and you'd have to decide real quick if that was a friendly observation or a threat. Into this chaos, guerrilla fighters emerged on both sides. The pro-Union fighters were called Jayhawkers. The pro-Confederate fighters were called Bushwhackers. And let me tell you, these weren't gentlemen soldiers in neat uniforms. These were brutal, merciless men who gave no quarter and expected none. Your brother Frank joined up with these Confederate bushwhackers when he was 18. You wanted to follow at just 15, but they turned you down. Too young, they said. Can you imagine? Too young for war, but not too young to have war visit your doorstep. When you finally did join up at 16, riding with Fletch Taylor's squad, the other guerrillas mocked you, called you the baby, said you didn't have the stomach for it. That changed fast after your first kill. One of your fellow soldiers would later say you were the keenest and cleanest fighter in the command. High praise in a group where survival depended on your willingness to pull the trigger first. Most of the guerrillas in this squad were under 21, including Archie Clement, an 18-year-old who became one of your mentors. These weren't experienced soldiers, these were essentially teenagers with guns and a grudge, and they were effectively teaching each other how to be ruthless. You know what's bonkers? Think about what you were doing at 16, playing video games, worrying about homework. Jesse James was learning the most efficient ways to kill a man. This wasn't a war with rules, this was pure survival. Every barn and stream became a battlefield. Every civilian was either an ally or a target. You learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one outside your immediate circle, to shoot first and never bother with questions. Either you kill them or they kill you, was the mantra. And Missouri was the perfect training ground for the brutal outlaw you would become. In the summer of 1864, you suffered your first serious injury. You were trotting along on horseback with your brother when you spotted a pretty saddle on a fence. Your own saddle was in poor condition, so you decided to take it, but just as you put your hands on it, bang! A bullet pierced your chest. The pain was so intense you reportedly told a friend you wanted the Unionists to just capture you and end your life, but the bullet missed your vital organs, and within a month you were back in the saddle. That's not even the bullet still in your lung, by the way. That one came later, because apparently one chest wound wasn't enough for young Jesse James. Later, you and Frank joined the gang of William Bloody Bill Anderson, easily the most feared bushwhacker leader in Missouri. This is where your education in terror really took off. Anderson had this charming habit of scalping Union soldiers after killing them and tying the scalps to his horse's bridle. Lovely dinner conversation, I know. Under Anderson's command, you witnessed some truly horrific scenes. Once, Anderson tortured a prisoner with a knife, cutting off both his ears before finishing him with a bullet to the head. And you know what's really disturbing? You admired this man. You wanted to be like him, to earn his respect. In today's episode of Humans Are Weird, you actually wanted the approval of a man who decorated his horse with human scalps. September 27, 1864 marked one of the most heinous events of the Civil War, the Centralia Massacre. Bloody Bill Anderson, along with 80 guerrillas including you and Frank, entered the small Missouri town of Centralia. The town was built around a Union cargo depot, a strategic point for guerrillas like you. Anderson and his men looted everything they could find and then blocked the railway track as a train approached. The guerrillas stopped the locomotive and invaded it, separating the 125 passengers between civilians and soldiers. There were 24 Union militiamen on board, all unarmed and going home on leave. Bloody Bill had the soldiers line up and declared, "From this time forward I ask no quarter and give none. Every Federal soldier on whom I put my fingers shall die like a dog." And then, God, this is brutal. Anderson's men opened fire, killing all 24 unarmed soldiers. Their bodies were scalped, mutilated, and the train was set on fire. You were there for this. You watched it happen. Maybe you participated. The records aren't clear, but you were there, a 17-year-old boy, witnessing, or worse, taking part in, a war crime. In October 1864, Anderson was finally killed in an ambush. After his death, you and Frank went separate ways temporarily. Frank joined up with General Quantrill in Kentucky, while you headed to Texas under Archie Clement's command. At 17, you were shot again as you attempted to surrender near Lexington, Missouri. This time, the bullet lodged directly in your right lung and would remain there for the rest of your life. It took several months to recover from this wound, and during your convalescence, the Civil War finally came to an end. 4 years of conflict left America more divided than ever. 620,000 soldiers perished on both sides. The Union emerged victorious while the Confederate States faced a bitter defeat. Missouri was particularly devastated. About 1 in 3 citizens had been killed in combat, murdered at home, driven away by guerrilla warfare, or simply moved to a safer place. By late 1865, you and Frank returned home to join your family. You were 18, with a bullet permanently lodged in your lung, and the war had officially ended. But for you, the conflict was far from over. You had seen your side defeated after a long, bloody confrontation. Your family had nothing left. The defeat and its consequences for the South did not sit well with you. A sense of vengeance haunted you. The war had fractured your country and left your family destitute. Surrendering was unthinkable for Jesse James. You had to continue the fight. By the winter of 1865-1866, you and Frank were residing on the family farm. The war was over, but you needed to find a way to provide for your family. The conflict had stripped you and your loved ones of everything, and you were determined to reclaim what you believed was rightfully yours. What irritated you most was the oppressive presence of Union soldiers still on your territory. You were resolved to defend yourself and your family, so you devised a plan. And you found one that would make history. You realized that banks primarily held the wealth of the North, even in southern banks. You figured that robbing banks could be the best way to express your resentment, plundering banks and stealing from the Unionists. It was the perfect target, especially since banks at the time had minimal security. With peace restored, you and Frank joined your former war comrades, including Archie Clement, who was leading the group. On February 13th, 1866, you and your gang participated in what many consider the first armed bank robbery in broad daylight during peacetime in the United States. Your target was the Clay County Savings Association in the city of Liberty, Missouri. This wasn't just a bank, but see, this the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The Liberty Bank robbery was audacious. You and your gang stormed the bank in the middle of the day, weapons drawn, terrifying the employees and customers. When it was over, you'd stolen $60,000, equivalent to nearly $1 million today. During your escape, a passerby was killed, so now you'd not only stolen an enormous sum, but you had blood on your hands. And yet, in your mind, this wasn't just a robbery. It was an act of political rebellion. This was your first revenge against the North. The Unionist owner of the bank, furious at the robbery, promised a reward of $5,000 for the capture of the criminals. The crime made headlines in newspapers throughout the state, and for the first time, the name Jesse James appeared on wanted posters. Your path was set. There would be no going back. But then tragedy struck. On December 13th, 1866, Archie Clement, your mentor, combat companion and best friend, was killed by the state militia. For you, it was a devastating loss, and you took a long time to recover. But after Archie's death, something changed in you. You took the reins of the gang and rose to power. The entire nation would soon feel the consequences, though no one knew it yet. The months following Clement's death saw you and your accomplices continue their armed robberies. Bank heists became your specialty, and over the next 2 years, you refined your techniques and grew bolder. In early March 1868, you and Frank, accompanied by Cole Younger and 4 other former guerrillas, decided to rob a bank in Russellville, Kentucky. Unlike the Clay County job, this time the attack had no obvious political purpose. You were developing a taste for the outlaw life itself. The bandits scouted the location carefully, and when ready, you took action. During the heist, a citizen of Russellville was shot, and your gang escaped with $9,000 in bills and $3,000 in gold coins, a notable haul for the time. But it was the robbery of the Davis County Savings Association in Gallatin, Missouri, that would truly bring Jesse James into the spotlight and reveal the burning hatred still driving you. It was December 7th, 1869. At 12:30 p.m, you dismounted your horse in front of the bank. No one in Gallatin suspected anything as you entered the building. Inside, you saw an employee sitting at the back of the room in front of the safe. But something strange happened. Instead of immediately demanding money, you carefully examined the cashier's face, staring at him as if you were looking for someone specific. Then you reached under your coat, pulled out a revolver, cocked the hammer, and said something that chilled everyone who heard it. "Cox caused the death of my brother Bill Anderson, and I am bound to have my revenge." Who was Cox? You believed you were dealing with Samuel Cox, the person responsible for the murder of your former leader and friend, Bloody Bill Anderson. Except, and this is where the story takes a tragic turn, you had the wrong man. The person in front of you had nothing to do with Cox. But unaware of your mistake, you pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced the heart of the innocent cashier. Before he could even fall from his chair, you aimed at his forehead and fired a second time. The screams of the dying man echoed outside the bank. It was time for you and your gang to flee. You grabbed the wallet from the dead cashier's desk and made your escape. During your horseback getaway, the enraged residents of Gallatin opened fire and you narrowly escaped death. Ultimately, the robbery yielded little money, but you, convinced you had avenged your friend Bloody Bill, had killed an innocent man. Following the Gallatin heist, you were labelled an outlaw for the first time in the press. The governor of Missouri, Thomas Crittenden, offered a reward for your capture. It was after this tragic incident that the legend of Jesse James began to take root. And, surprisingly, a large part of that was thanks to one man, John Newman Edwards, the founder of the Kansas City Times newspaper. Without Edwards, Jesse James would likely have fallen into oblivion like so many other criminals of the era. But Edwards was a staunch supporter of the Confederate cause who sought a way to promote his political ideologies. Upon discovering you, he saw his chance. After the Gallatin murder, Edwards partnered with you, publishing numerous letters that you yourself wrote to his newspaper. In these letters, you asserted your innocence to the public. Over time, the tone of your writings became increasingly political. You praised the Confederate cause and denounced the policies of your enemies. Edwards helped transform you from a common criminal into a symbol of Southern resistance. He wrote of you, "There is always a smile on his lips and a graceful word or compliment for all with whom he comes in contact. Jesse laughs at everything, frank at nothing at all. Jesse is light-hearted, reckless, devil-may-care. Frank, sober, sedate, a dangerous man always in ambush in the midst of society." With Edward's help, your reputation grew. You weren't just a bank robber anymore, you were becoming a folk hero to many in the South, a Robin Hood figure fighting against northern oppression. But make no mistake, there was nothing heroic about what came next. As your gang expanded to include the younger brothers, Cole, John, Jim and Bob, along with Clell Miller and other former bushwhackers, the violence only escalated. Together, you formed what became known as the James Younger Gang, and you were about to take your vendetta to the next level. The railways, the very arteries of the Union's expansion westward. The sun is rising now over that Missouri farmhouse. You've been awake for hours, planning your next move. There's a price on your head, but there's fire in your heart. The war isn't over for you, it's just beginning. And as you strap on your gun belt and step into the early morning light, you have no idea that your name will echo through American history for the next 150 years. You're just a young man with a bullet in his lung and revenge in his soul, about to write the first bloody chapter of your legend. But that's a story for another moment. Your eyes are getting heavy as you think about what's to come. The James Younger gang's first train robbery, the Pinkerton detectives who will hunt you, the newspapers that will make you infamous. The world of Jesse James was brutal, unforgiving, and shaped by a war that tore a nation apart. And as you drift towards sleep in your safe, comfortable bed, remember how lucky you are to live in a time where the worst thing under your bed is just a dust bunny, not a man with a gun waiting to take your life. The year is 1873. Summer heat hangs heavy in the air. You're crouched in tall grass beside a railroad track in Iowa, sweat trickling down your back. The crowbar in your hand feels slick. Your brother Frank is 10 feet away, checking the rope that connects to the rail you've loosened. Cole Younger and Clell Miller are keeping watch, hands never far from their revolvers. Your heart isn't racing anymore, not like it did during your first bank robbery 7 years ago. Now there's just the steady beat of anticipation as you wait for the Chicago, Rock Island and Pacific Railroad train to approach. This is your first train robbery. Your crew has picked this spot because the railroad forms a curve here, forcing the locomotive to slow down, perfect for what you're about to do. You can feel it before you hear it, the ground vibrating beneath your palms. Then comes the distant chuff, chuff, chuff of the steam engine, growing louder. You pull your mask up, not just any mask, but one depicting the Ku Klux Klan. It was a choice meant to send a message, though one that would prove controversial even among your Southern sympathizers. "Ready?" Frank whispers. You nod. "Born ready." The locomotive rounds the bend, its headlamp cutting through the evening darkness. As it approaches the weakened rail, you pull the rope. The rail diverts from the track. The engineer sees the danger and slams on the brakes, but it's too late. The train bucks abruptly, some of the cars overturning with a screech of metal so loud it hurts your ears. The train engineer is crushed to death by the locomotive, an unintended casualty that even you hadn't planned for. But there's no time for remorse. You jump into action, racing toward the express car, while your accomplices secure the area. You leap into the car, remove your mask, and point your revolver at the guard. "If you don't open the safe or give me the key," you growl, "I'll blow your brains out." The guard's face goes white. His hands shake as he hands over the key without resistance. You find the loot inside the safe much less substantial than the gang had anticipated, about 2,337s. But it's not just about the money. It never was. During this train attack, one of your gang members addresses the passengers with words that would become part of your legend. "We're none of your petty thieves. We're bold robbers. We're robbing the rich for the poor. We don't want to hurt you." It's a statement that helps cement your image as a sort of Robin Hood figure, stealing from the wealthy northern interests to avenge the South. The entire robbery lasted just 10 minutes, but its impact would echo for years. The railroad company immediately offers a $5,000 reward for your capture, and newspapers across the nation carry the story. Your name is on everyone's lips. You know what's wild about all this? Train robbery was barely even a thing before you came along. You and your gang essentially invented the American train heist as we know it. Before the James Younger gang, nobody had the guts to stop a moving train in peacetime and rob it in broad daylight. "Stopping a train is like stopping time," you once told your brother Frank. "For those few minutes, we're in control of everything." Your gang quickly refined your techniques. On January 31st, 1874, just 6 months after your first train job, you rob your second train. This one takes place at Gads Hill, Missouri, with you, Frank, and the younger brothers. The night before, your gang spots several men walking on the train platform. To carry out your plan, you capture and tie them up. Then you obtain a red flag, universally recognized as a signal of danger, and wait for the train to arrive. The locomotive arrives an hour and a half late, and you've been waiting in the January cold for hours, but you're ready. One of your men waves the red flag, forcing the train to slow down. The conductor steps out to see what's happening, when suddenly one of your gang grabs him by the collar and presses a revolver against his face. Stand still or I'll blow the top of your head off. Then the outlaw turns toward the locomotive where the passengers are and shouts, "If a shot is fired out of the car, I'll kill the conductor." Just like the Iowa job, you and your gang wear Klan masks. Inside, the vault keeper has his revolver ready, anxiously awaiting your arrival. A masked face appears in the doorway, and the keeper aims his weapon, but freezes when he realizes there aren't just one but two bandits before him. One of your men points his rifle at the keeper's chest. "Give me your pistol, you son of a bitch." The keeper, unwilling to die a hero, immediately complies and hands over the vault key. Your gang makes off with approximately $1,080. After emptying the vault, your men move through the passenger cars, robbing them of their money and jewellery. But here's the thing, you and your gang carefully inspect the hands of each man, declaring to the passengers that you have no intention of robbing workers or ladies. Your sole interest lies in the money and valuables of the gentlemen in hats, the wealthy elite. Once the passengers have been relieved of their belongings, your gang makes a quick escape, disappearing before the locomotive even starts moving again. In total, you've stolen nearly $2,000. What's even more bizarre, you leave behind a press release for the local newspaper. The most daring robbery on record. The southbound train on the Iron Mountain Railroad was robbed here this morning by 5 heavily armed men and robbed of blank dollars. The rest of the press release describes in great detail the events following the heist, showing that everything unfolded as planned. You've just pulled off your second train robbery and nothing seems capable of stopping you. With each heist, you and your gang refine your skills, growing bolder with every success. But while you're celebrating your victories, someone else is planning to hunt you down. Remember the bank robbery in Corydon, Iowa from '71? Well, the owner of that bank enlisted the services of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a detective agency that would soon become your most dedicated enemy. Similarly, after the Gads Hill train robbery, the Adams Express Company, owner of the robbed safe, reached out to the Pinkertons as well. They were determined to apprehend the James Younger gang, and for this they turned to the head of the agency, Alan Pinkerton. At that time, Alan Pinkerton was the most famous private detective in the country. He gained prominence during the Civil War for ensuring Abraham Lincoln's safety in Washington and thwarting an assassination plot against him. The staunch Unionist, vehemently opposed to slavery, established his agency in the 1850s. The Pinkerton Agency was essentially the precursor to the FBI and CIA. Their goal was to spy on and track professional criminals. One of their greatest achievements occurred in 1868 when they captured and defeated the Reno Gang, a band of outlaws known for committing the first 3 train robberies in peacetime in US history, until you came along and made train robbery an art form, that is. After the Gads Hill heist, the Adams Express Company contacted Alan Pinkerton with a mission: take down Jesse James. For this, Pinkerton dispatched one of his most talented agents, Detective Joseph Witcher. Witcher's objective? Go to Clay County, infiltrate the James farm, and gather as much information as possible about you and your gang. It should have been a simple job. Get in, gather intel, get out. But Witcher had no idea what he was walking into. Upon arrival in Clay County, the local law enforcement refused to assist the Pinkerton agent. Clay County was your territory and the locals protected their own. This left Witcher no choice but to disguise himself as a farm labourer to collect the needed intelligence. Even in disguise, he struggled to obtain information. Witcher was a northerner in hostile territory. You had many friends ready to defend you in Clay County and throughout the South. To many, you weren't a criminal, but a hero avenging the Confederates through your numerous heists. There was another challenge too. Very few people knew what you actually looked like. If someone hadn't grown up with you or fought alongside you during the war, they couldn't identify you. All the authorities had were eyewitness descriptions, which were, shall we say, inconsistent at best. Get this. Even your own son, who you would have later in life, didn't know your real name. That's how deep your cover went. For Witcher, the task was nearly impossible. Nevertheless, he persisted and eventually found what he was seeking, the location of the James farm. To infiltrate, Witcher planned to pose as a labourer looking for work. Upon arriving at the farm, your mother Zerelda welcomed him, and Witcher made his request to work in her fields. But what Witcher didn't realise was that his fair complexion and smooth hands immediately gave him away as someone who had never worked a day of manual labour in his life. Witcher was confident despite being warned by the former sheriff in the area, who told him, "The old woman would kill you if the boys don't." What happened next is shrouded in mystery. All we know is that Joseph Witcher was found shot with 3 bullets along a rural road in Jackson County. 3 individuals, including you and your brother Frank, were believed to be responsible for the murder. Imagine the scene. Witcher approaching the James farm thinking he's so clever with his disguise, but your mother, tough as nails from years of hardship, takes one look at his soft hands and city boy demeanour and knows exactly what he is. "Looking for work, are you?" Zerelda might have said, her voice sweet but her eyes hard as flint. "My boys could use some help in the North Field." And then she sends word to you and Frank that there's a Pinkerton man snooping around. The rest, as they say, is history. 3 bullets and a shallow grave. The death of Witcher was a huge embarrassment for the Pinkerton agency. Alan Pinkerton himself took it as a personal affront. One of his best men murdered while on assignment. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a vendetta. Following Joseph Witcher's murder, you fall into a deep rage. Nothing infuriated you more than being hunted. However, as days pass, you gradually calm down. You decide to marry your first cousin, Zerelda Z. Mims. Yes, she had the same name as your mother, with whom you will eventually have 2 children. During your honeymoon, rumours circulate that you and your gang robbed several stagecoaches. Even while celebrating your marriage, you couldn't resist the pull of the outlaw life. Meanwhile, Alan Pinkerton, upon learning of Witcher's death, is furious. It marks one of his biggest failures, and he's determined to personally handle the matter. He wants revenge against Jesse James, the outlaw who killed his agent and humiliated his agency. The James Younger gang continues their crime spree, targeting another train near Muncie, Kansas on December 8, 1874. This time, the bandits escape with a loot of $30,000, equivalent to about $750,000 today. Everything seems to be going well for you, now 27 years old, and one of the most successful outlaws of your era. You're known nationwide, making headlines thanks to John Newman Edwards, who continues to glorify you in his newspaper. You're married to a woman you love, and you've successfully thwarted the formidable Pinkerton agency. Who wouldn't feel invincible in your position? Yet, the game was far from one. Your longtime enemies were preparing to strike back in a way that would shock even you. After Joseph Witcher's murder and his humiliating defeat, Alan Pinkerton, head of the detective agency, is determined not to let it rest. For him, the end now justifies the means. He's willing to operate outside the bounds of the law to bring you down. Everything comes to a head on the night of January 25th, 1875, when a group of agents dispatched by Alan Pinkerton surrounds your family farm. In a move that crosses every line of legal conduct, they throw an incendiary device, essentially a primitive bomb, into the house, hoping to flush you out or kill you outright. The consequences of this attack are devastating. Your mother, Zerelda, present that night, is seriously injured in her right arm and must undergo amputation. Your 8-year-old half-brother Archie dies sometime after the explosion. As for you and Frank, you simply weren't there. Present just hours earlier, Pinkerton's agents narrowly missed their chance to capture or kill you. Imagine coming home to find your childhood home in flames, your mother screaming in pain, her arm mangled beyond repair, your little brother dying from his injuries, and all because Pinkerton decided that taking down Jesse James was worth any cost, even the lives of women and children. It's no surprise that after this, in the words of an old Missouri saying, "You were mad enough to bite yourself," already angered by the detective's pursuit, you become even more furious upon learning this news. For you, Alan Pinkerton and his agents represented the ultimate evil. Northern oppressors who violate the law in the interest of big businesses. And the fact that the agents involved in the raid were never prosecuted after the incident. That only makes matters worse. Your vengeance is swift and terrible. On April 12th, 1875, you shoot and kill Daniel Askew, a neighbour of the James farm and a former Union militiaman who aided Pinkerton's detectives during the raid. After this murder, Alan Pinkerton finally abandons the pursuit of the James Younger gang. It's his greatest defeat. Jesse James had defied him like no one before, and Pinkerton's reputation was utterly ruined by his failure to capture you and the excessive methods he employed in the attempt. Your mother Zerelda, by the way, becomes something of a celebrity after the Pinkerton raid. Despite losing her arm, she begins giving tours of the farm to curious visitors, showing off the damage from the bomb. She'd even sell small rocks from the explosion site as souvenirs for 25 cents each. When she ran out of authentic rocks, she'd just grab some from the yard. Enterprising woman, your mama. For the next year, you keep a lower profile. The attention from the Pinkerton raid is too hot, and you need to let things cool down. But the outlaw life calls to you, and by the summer of 1876, you're ready to ride again. Following Alan Pinkerton's abandonment, you and your gang continue your heists. You now plan to rob a train near Otterville, Missouri. In the gang are you and Frank, Cole and Bob Younger, Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, Bill Chadwell, and a newcomer named Hobbs Kerry. The robbery takes place on July 7th, 1876. Your loot amounts to $8,300, a significant sum of money intended to fund the gang's journey to Minnesota. But why Minnesota? That's the real question. It had been over a month since you and your gang had been planning a rather audacious bank heist up north. On the surface, committing a second robbery in such a short period seemed nonsensical. It would have been far too dangerous, especially after pulling off a train heist of such magnitude. In reality, it appeared that you weren't interested in the money at that moment. No, your motivation was quite different. You wanted to strike at the heart of the enemy, the North itself. The idea for the heist came from you and Bob Younger. You were going to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. It was a rather surprising target, far from your usual territory and deep in enemy territory in the North. Frank and Cole tried to dissuade their younger brothers from committing what seemed like an unthinkable risk, but they couldn't convince you. Your personal vendetta against the North seemed to have no bounds. Why this particular bank? The rural bank wasn't exceptionally wealthy. You chose it because it was associated with Adelbert Ames, the Unionist governor of Mississippi during Reconstruction, a man who represented everything you hated about Northern rule over the defeated South. Present in the gang for this ambitious heist were you, Frank, Cole, Jim, and Bob Younger, Clell Miller, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell. To carry out this incredible heist, you decided to split into 3 groups. One that would enter the First National Bank, another that would stand guard outside, and the last whose mission was to protect the pre-planned escape route. You and Bob volunteered to enter the bank, as you were the ones who organised the heist. Frank joined you as well. Cole Younger and Clell Miller positioned themselves outside the bank to monitor the area. Jim Younger, Charlie Pitts, and Bill Chadwell were tasked with covering the rear guard. Your plan unfolded as follows. You, Frank, and Bob would enter the town of Northfield first, crossing the bridge leading to the town square around 1 in the afternoon. Cole Younger and Clell Miller would then enter the town. At that point, your group would enter the bank once Cole and Clell reached the outside of the building. Jim's group would enter Northfield and cover the escape route. After completing the robbery, the outlaws would gather at the exit point. Bill, Clell, and Bob would destroy the telegraph lines and the gang would make their escape. Finally, it was decided that no citizen should be killed. If someone shot at you, you would wound them in return, but under no circumstances were there to be any deaths. It was September 7th, 1876. The air was crisp with early autumn, and the town of Northfield went about its business, unaware that the infamous James Younger gang had arrived with blood and robbery on their minds. You, Frank, and Bob crossed the bridge and headed toward the town's square. There you sat on crates and waited for Cole and Clell to make their appearance. Soon the second group entered town. At exactly 2 p.m, you, Bob, and Frank entered the First National Bank, oddly leaving the door slightly ajar. Cole and Clell arrived at the bank and dismounted from their horses. Seeing the bank's front door ajar, Clell promptly closed it. The 2 men waited patiently outside. Clell strolled his horse down the middle of the street, pretending to adjust the saddle strap, while Cole smoked his pipe in front of the bank. Jim, Charlie, and Bill, meanwhile, reached their designated cover point and waited calmly on their mounts. Inside the bank, you and your accomplices spotted 3 employees: Alonzo Bunker the teller, Joseph Lee Haywood the acting cashier, and Frank Wilcox the accountant. Immediately you drew your weapons and pointed them at the employees. "Throw up your hands," you commanded, "for we intend to rob the bank, and if you holler, we will blow your goddamn brains out." The trio of outlaws jumped over the counter. You asked Haywood if he was the cashier, and Haywood responded in the negative. The same question was posed to Bunker and Wilcox, but neither responded affirmatively. You then directed your attention back to Haywood. "You are the cashier now. Open the safe, you goddamn son of a bitch." But Haywood refused. Meanwhile, Frank headed toward the vault to inspect the safe, and Bob pointed his weapon at the 2 other employees. Frank was about to enter the room when suddenly Haywood threw himself at the door, attempting to lock him inside. Frank managed to get out just in time, but he was injured with his arm and hand wounded. With the butt of his revolver, Bob struck Haywood, who fell to the ground. The heist was off to a bad start, and outside things weren't any better. 2 Northfield citizens quickly noticed the suspicious presence of Cole Younger and Clell Miller in front of the bank. One of them approached the establishment, but Clell prevented him by grabbing him by the collar. However, the individual had been able to see what was transpiring through one of the bank's windows. "You son of a bitch, don't you holler!" At that moment, Clell made a serious mistake. Instead of pushing the individual into the bank to avoid arousing suspicion, he released him outside. It didn't take long for the Northfield resident to alert his fellow citizens. "Get your guns, boys, they're robbing the bank robbery." Clell then opened fire on the man, but the bullet narrowly missed his head. The robbery was going south faster than anyone could have anticipated. Cole and Clell mounted their horses and started charging through the streets, shouting to their accomplices inside the bank, "Get out, get out!" On the other side of town, Jim, Bill and Charlie heard the first gunshot and immediately rushed to the rescue, firing into the air to discourage the town's residents. Unfortunately for them, it wasn't enough. The citizens of Northfield had already armed themselves and began opening fire from all directions. Inside the bank, your group still couldn't find a way to open the safe. Haywood, after Bob's pistol whipping, was still lying on the floor. That's when you approached him, knelt down, took out a knife from your pocket and placed it on the cashier's neck. "Open that door," you threatened, "or we'll cut your throat from ear to ear." Haywood, though terrified, responded that you could cut him since he absolutely couldn't open it. Irritated and frustrated, you then made a slight cut on Haywood's neck. You pointed your revolver at him and ordered him once again to open the safe. The cashier finally responded that the safe was equipped with a timer and as such could not be opened. Haywood was telling the truth. There was indeed a timer on the safe, but it wasn't activated. In fact, the safe hadn't been unlocked all this time, but you and your gang were unaware. At that moment, Bob busied himself putting all the scattered bills he found into a bag. Frank, on the other hand, kept an eye on Wilcox, the bank's accountant. For Bunker, the teller, this was the opportunity to make a getaway. He rushed toward the back door when Bob noticed and started chasing him. He fired a shot, hitting Bunker in the shoulder, causing him to stumble, but Bunker managed to get up and escape. Cole walked in front of the bank and shouted at you, Frank and Bob, "Hurry up, they're giving the alarm." Bullets continued to fly in all directions. Cole defended himself as best he could. At that moment, he saw a young man in the middle of the street, paralyzed by fear on his horse. Cole, who was right next to him, shouted at him to get off the damn street. Unfortunately, the young man, a Swedish immigrant, neither spoke nor understood English, so he couldn't grasp what Cole was saying. He then received a bullet to the head and died a few days later. Meanwhile, Clell Miller rode to the bank to tell you and the others to hurry up, but when he left and got back on his horse, he was shot. Clell screamed in pain but continued to fire his revolvers nonetheless. Cole and Jim, on the other hand, each received a bullet to the left shoulder. Inside the bank, you were getting desperate. The plan was falling apart around you. Outside, your men were shouting, "They're killing our men, get out here." You had already fired a warning shot into the ground that narrowly missed Haywood's head, but it was too much for Bob, who decided to abandon the heist with his bag of money. You followed and Frank brought up the rear. At the moment of leaving the bank, Frank claimed to have seen Haywood get up, pull out a small caliber pistol and aim it at him. With a quick motion, he shot the cashier dead. Once outside, you and Frank mounted your horses and began to charge down the street where bullets were still flying from all directions. Ultimately, what remained of the James Younger gang managed to leave the town of Northfield. The heist was a total failure. Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell had been killed and you had stolen a mere $26. But your ordeal was far from over. The largest manhunt in the history of the United States was about to begin, and you were its primary target. The citizens of Northfield weren't about to let the James Younger gang escape after the failed robbery and the death of their cashier. The news of the pursuit spread throughout the country, and at least 1,000 people mobilized in what would become a historic manhunt. As you gallop away from Northfield, bullets whizzing past your head, you have no idea that this failed heist will be the beginning of the end of your outlaw career. Your legend is about to enter its darkest chapter, and the price of revenge is about to come due. But that's a story for our next Moonlit Chat. The setting sun paints the Minnesota sky crimson as you and what's left of your gang flee Northfield. The smell of gunpowder still clings to your clothes. Your horse is lathered with sweat, breathing hard. Behind you, the shouts of angry townspeople fade, but they'll be coming. Everyone will be coming. "We need to split up," Frank says, his voice tight with pain from his wounded hand. You look around at your battered crew. Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell are dead, left behind in the streets of Northfield. Cole and Jim Younger each have bullets in their left shoulders. Bob Younger isn't much better off. Charlie Pitts looks terrified, his eyes darting everywhere. "They're going to hunt us like dogs," Charlie mutters. He's right. The telegraph wires are already humming with news of the failed robbery. Within hours, every lawman, bounty hunter, and glory seeker in Minnesota will be after your blood. Stick together, you decide, at least for now. For the next week, you and your gang gallop south, pushing your horses to exhaustion. You ride by night, hide by day. You avoid roads, splash through streams to throw off trackers, sleep in short, fitful bursts with one hand always on your gun. Your brother Frank keeps the group moving, even as the wounded men grow feverish. You can see the worry etched on his face. This isn't like your other escapes. This time you've stirred up a hornet's nest, and the hornets have guns. After 7 days of hard riding, disaster strikes. Your horses, pushed beyond endurance, begin to falter. One by one they collapse, leaving you and your gang on foot in hostile territory. West, you tell them. We head for Dakota territory. The younger brothers are in bad shape. Their wounds are festering, turning their skin hot and their eyes glassy. Some have lost their coats, leaving them exposed to the cold Minnesota nights. All of you are hungry, starving, really, having exhausted your provisions days ago. One night, huddled around a tiny, smokeless fire, Cole Younger speaks the words you've been dreading. "Jesse," he says, his voice weak, "we need to split up. Frank and you're not wounded. You can move faster." You start to protest, but deep down you know he's right. The Youngers are slowing you down, leaving a trail even an amateur tracker could follow. Your chances of escape are dwindling by the hour. We'll meet up later, you promise, though all of you suspect these might be the last words you ever exchange. In the pale light of dawn, you and Frank part ways with the rest of the gang. Cole, Jim, Bob, and Charlie Pitts continue west, while you and Frank angle southwest. "Good luck," Cole says simply. "You've known the younger brothers since the war, fought alongside them, robbed with them, and now you're leaving them behind. See you on the other side," you reply, clasping his hand briefly before turning away. What follows is a grueling test of endurance that would break most men. You and Frank navigate by stars, avoid settlements, steal food when necessary. Your clothes are in tatters, your boots worn through, your body, already carrying the permanent souvenir of that bullet in your lung, screams for rest that never comes. Sleep becomes a luxury you can't afford. When you do drift off, it's with your back against a tree, revolver in hand, waking at the slightest sound. The rustle of leaves becomes the footsteps of pursuers. The hoot of an owl might be a signal between pauses. "You ever think about giving up?" Frank asks one night. You're hiding in an abandoned barn, rain drumming on the roof. "And swing from a rope?" "No thanks," you answer, but the question haunts you. How long can you keep running? Meanwhile, the Youngers and Charlie Pitts aren't as fortunate. Suffering from hunger, the wounded men become careless in their escape. Near Medelia, Minnesota, they're spotted by a local farmer who alerts authorities. A posse surrounds them. Charlie Pitts is killed in the ensuing shootout, while the Younger brothers, too injured to continue fighting, surrender. Cole Younger alone has taken 11 bullets during the entire Northfield ordeal. It's a miracle he's still breathing. Against all odds, you and Frank manage what seems impossible. After covering hundreds of kilometers through hostile territory and evading over 1,000 pursuers, you emerge from the ordeal unscathed. You've made it to Tennessee, leaving the largest manhunt in American history empty-handed, at least when it comes to the James brothers. The Younger brothers, meanwhile, are sentenced to life imprisonment in Stillwater Prison. Despite their wounds, harsh treatment and bleak prospects, they maintain their loyalty to you and Frank, never once betraying your whereabouts during their interrogations or imprisonment. Where are the James boys headed? The authorities demand. James who? Cole Younger reportedly replies, his face betraying nothing despite his pain. Under new identities, you and Frank spend the next 3 years living peacefully in Nashville, Tennessee. You become Thomas Howard, a gentleman farmer with a slight southern drawl and impeccable manners. Frank takes the name B.J. Woodson. For Frank, it's an enjoyable lifestyle. He finds fulfillment as a farmer, reading books in the evening, attending church on Sundays. He's older than you, perhaps wiser, more able to set aside the past and embrace this new, quieter life. For you, however, it's a different story. You simply cannot adapt. You pace your rented house like a caged animal. The stillness that Frank finds peaceful feels like a noose tightening around your neck. Everyday tasks, feeding chickens, mending fences, making small talk with neighbours, seem pointless, meaningless. This is dying, not living, you mutter to Frank one evening. Better than actually dying, he counters. But you can't let go. The failure at Northfield, your first major defeat as an outlaw, has left a bitter taste in your mouth. Your desire for revenge hasn't diminished. If anything, it's grown stronger, more obsessive. While Frank gradually retires from the outlaw life, you begin forming a new gang. It's a risky move. Your face might be unknown to most, but the name Jesse James carries a $10,000 bounty now, dead or alive. The men you recruit aren't like your old war comrades. They didn't ride with Quantrill or Bloody Bill Anderson. They haven't survived years of guerrilla warfare. They're younger, more reckless, drawn by your legend rather than shared experience. In July 1879, your new gang carries out its first major heist, the Chicago and Alton train near Glendale, Missouri. It's a successful robbery, netting about $6,000, but something feels different. There's none of the camaraderie, the seamless coordination you had with your old gang. These new men are strangers, united only by greed. And in this line of work, greed makes for dangerous company. Over the next 2 years, your new gang carries out a series of robberies: a stagecoach in Kentucky, a federal paymaster in Alabama, the Winston train in Missouri. But the operations lack the precision and planning of your earlier heists. Mistakes are made. One of your new recruits, Tucker Basham, is captured after the Winston train robbery and quickly talks, revealing details about the gang. Another, Bill Ryan, is arrested in Nashville and also cooperates with authorities. This growing pattern of betrayal feeds your paranoia. You become increasingly suspicious of your men, watching them for signs of disloyalty, testing them in small ways. It is said that during this period you became so distrustful that you allegedly killed one of your own gang members on mere suspicion of treachery. The stress shows on your face. The light-hearted, devil-may-care Jesse described by John Newman Edwards has been replaced by a harder, colder man. Your wife Z notices the change in you, the way your eyes constantly scan for threats, the way you position yourself with your back to walls, the way your hand never strays far from your revolver. "You need to stop, Jesse," she pleads one night after you wake violently from a nightmare, gun already drawn. "For me, for the children." You have 2 children now, Jesse Edward, born in 1875, and Mary, born in 1879. Neither knows their father's real name or occupation. To them, you are Thomas Howard, and your frequent absences are explained as business trips. "Just one more job," you tell her. "The same promise you've been making for years. One big score, and we're done." But you both know it's a lie. There will always be one more job. The Outlaw Trail has no exit except the grave. In the spring of 1880, one of your remaining contacts from the old days introduces you to 2 young brothers from Missouri, Charlie and Robert Ford. Charlie, the older brother, quickly ingratiates himself with you. He's eager, full of admiration for your exploits, seemingly willing to do anything to prove himself. "I've heard all about you since I was a kid," Charlie tells you, eyes shining. "The things you did during the war, the banks, the trains. You're a legend, Mr. Howard." You like Charlie's enthusiasm, his obvious respect. In your increasingly isolated world, such open admiration is rare and welcome. You recruit him into what remains of your gang. The heists continue, but your gang has dwindled to basically just you and Charlie Ford. With a bounty of $5,000 on your head, you need to maintain constant vigilance. Having only Charlie by your side doesn't provide much security. Planning to rob a bank in Platte City, you realise you need at least one more reliable man. Charlie suggests his younger brother, Robert. "Bob's solid," Charlie insists. "He can keep his mouth shut, and he's a good shot." You meet with Robert Ford, sizing him up. He's younger than Charlie, quieter, with an intense gaze that makes you slightly uneasy. But you need another gun, and your options are limited. "Your brother vouches for you," you tell him. "That's good enough for me." And so Robert Ford joins your diminished gang, becoming one of your last recruits. What you don't know, what you couldn't know, is that Robert Ford had already met with Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden, who had made your capture his top priority. The governor offered Ford a substantial reward for bringing in the notorious Jesse James. Robert had accepted the deal. Now, as he joins your inner circle, he's looking for his opportunity to collect. Betrayal is brewing right under your nose, served up with a side of morning coffee and friendly conversation. The early months of 1882 find you living in a small rented house in St. Joseph, Missouri. You've moved your family here for safety, still using the alias Thomas Howard. The house is modest, just a few rooms perched on a hill overlooking the town. From the windows you can see anyone approaching, a tactical consideration that's become second nature to you. Your paranoia has reached new heights. You sleep poorly, startling at small noises. You've taken to carrying your revolvers even inside the house. You check and recheck the doors and windows before turning in each night. Your wife Z has grown accustomed to your hypervigilance, but it worries her. "No one knows we're here," she reassures you one night. "Someone always knows," you reply. The Fords have become fixtures in your life. Charlie stays with you often, sleeping on a pallet in the front room. Robert visits frequently. You're planning the Platte City bank robbery together, going over the details, discussing escape routes and potential problems. But something about Robert Ford continues to set your teeth on edge. There's a hunger in his eyes when he looks at you, something beyond the usual admiration you've grown accustomed to from younger outlaws. It's almost as if he's memorizing you, studying you for some future purpose. "You trust him?" you ask Charlie one evening when Robert has left. "My own brother?" course I do, Charlie says, but there's a flicker of something, hesitation, guilt, in his expression that you almost catch. Almost. Here's the really weird thing about this part of your story. Your own children don't know who you are. They think their father's Thomas Howard, a cattle buyer who travels frequently on business. Jesse Jr. is 7 now. Mary, just 3. They've never heard the name Jesse James except as a notorious outlaw in newspaper stories. The irony is almost painful. The most famous bandit in America lives an anonymous life, even within his own home. Your son might walk past a wanted poster with your face on it and never make the connection. On April 2nd, 1882, you're reviewing the plans for the Platte City job with Charlie and Robert. The bank looks promising. Decent money, minimal security, good escape routes, but something still feels off. We'll do it Thursday, you decide, early before the town wakes up. That night, you sleep fitfully. Dreams of Northfield haunt you. The gunfire, the screaming Clell Miller falling dead in the street. You wake in the pre-dawn hours, your shirt soaked with sweat, the phantom pain of your lung wound throbbing in time with your heartbeat. As you stare at the ceiling, waiting for sunrise, a strange premonition settles over you, a sense of ending, of time running out. You've never been a superstitious man, but this feeling, it's like a cold hand on the back of your neck. April 3rd, 1882 dawns clear and mild. Spring is coming to Missouri, bringing with it green shoots and the scent of renewal. But for you, this ordinary Monday will be anything but. You, Charlie, and Robert have breakfast together at your house. The conversation is casual. Weather, horses, plans for the upcoming bank job. Your wife serves coffee, keeps Jesse Jr. and Mary quiet so you can talk. After the meal, you and Charlie head to the stable to feed and check on the horses. You'll need them in top condition for Thursday's ride to Platte City. The morning sun feels good on your face as you fork hay, check hooves, run your hands along flanks and withers. Good boy, you murmur to your favourite horse, a sturdy bay gelding that's carried you through more than one tight spot. Few more days, then we ride. When you return to the house, Robert is waiting in the living room. The morning is warming up and you're uncomfortable in your coat. Without thinking, a momentary lapse in the vigilance that has kept you alive all these years, you take off your coat, unbutton your vest, and toss them onto the bed. Then you say the words that will seal your fate. I guess I'll take off my pistols for fear somebody will see them if I walk in the yard. You unbuckle your gun belt and place your revolvers on the couch. For the first time in years, you're unarmed in the presence of others who aren't family. Your wife Z and the children are in the next room. Through the open door you can hear Mary's high, sweet voice as she plays with a doll, the domestic sounds of dishes being washed, normal life continuing in its ordinary way. The picture hanging crookedly on the wall catches your eye. It's a cheap print. The Midnight Challenge, showing a train at full steam, something you might have robbed in your younger days. You step up to straighten it, your back to the Ford brothers. You don't hear Robert move. Don't hear the soft click as he eases his revolver from its holster. You're reaching up to adjust the picture when you hear the distinctive sound of a hammer being cocked. That sound, you've heard it 1,000 times, made it 1,000 times. It's as familiar to you as your own heartbeat. Your body reacts before your mind can even process what's happening, muscles tensing to spin around, to face the threat. But you're too late. The shot is deafening in the small room. The bullet hits you just behind the right ear, tunneling through your brain before exiting near your forehead. You're dead before you hit the floor, your blood spreading quickly across the wooden planks. Jesse James, guerrilla fighter, bank robber, train bandit, husband, father, America's most notorious outlaw, dies at age 34, not in a blaze of gunfire during a daring heist, but in his own living room, shot in the back while adjusting a picture on the wall. The last thing you hear is the ringing of the gunshot. The last thing you feel is confusion. Not pain, not betrayal, just pure bewilderment. After everything you've survived, after all the bullets you've dodged, all the pauses you've outrun, all the traps you've escaped, to die like this. Unarmed, at home, at the hands of someone you trusted. Your wife rushes into the room at the sound of the shot, sees you on the floor, blood pooling beneath your head. Her screams bring neighbours running. Jesse Jr. and Mary, too young to understand what's happened, stand frozen in the doorway, staring at the father they barely knew, now lying still on the floor. The Ford brothers make no attempt to flee. They've done what they came to do. "I've just shot Jesse James," Robert Ford announces to the gathering crowd, something like pride in his voice. News of your death spreads like wildfire across the telegraph wires. "Jesse James killed" screams from newspaper headlines across the country. Within hours, crowds gather outside your house, hoping to catch a glimpse of your body or the man who killed you. Over 2,000 people attend your funeral, not out of respect, but curiosity, wanting to see the notorious outlaw one last time, to confirm that you're really dead, that the legend has finally ended. By the time you're laid to rest in the yard of your mother's farm, your death has already transformed you. To many, especially in the South, you were already considered a hero, a Robin Hood figure fighting against northern oppression, but the circumstances of your death, shot in the back, unarmed by a man you trusted, elevate you from hero to martyr in the public imagination. Charlie and Robert Ford surrender to the authorities, who charge them with first-degree murder. They plead guilty, are sentenced to death by hanging, and then, in a twist that surprises no one, receive a full pardon from Governor Crittenden, all on the same day. The reward they receive is less than promised, and the public's reaction to their deed is not what they expected. Rather than being celebrated as heroes for killing a notorious outlaw, they're reviled as cowards who shot an unarmed man in the back. "The dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard and laid poor Jesse in his grave," goes the folk song that's already spreading across Missouri. The Fords flee the state, hounded by former supporters of Jesse James and facing threats from your family and friends. They attempt to capitalize on their notoriety by performing in stage shows where they reenact the killing, but audiences receive them with contempt rather than admiration. Charlie Ford, suffering from tuberculosis and addicted to morphine, commits suicide on May 6, 1884, in Richmond, Missouri. Robert Ford never escapes his reputation as the coward who killed Jesse James. 10 years after your death, he's shot in the throat in his own saloon in Creede, Colorado, by Edward O'Kelly, who announces, "Hello, Bob," before pulling the trigger. O'Kelly is sentenced to life in prison for the murder, but is later pardoned after 7,000 people sign a petition in favour of his release. In the public mind, killing the man who killed Jesse James isn't murder, it's justice. After your death, Frank James, tired of running, surrenders to authorities and stands trial for murder in Missouri. To everyone's surprise, he's found not guilty, as he is in 2 other cases. Once free, he retires to lead a quiet life on the family farm, occasionally appearing in Wild West shows and giving tours of the James farmhouse to curious visitors. He dies in 1915 in the room where he was born. Your wife, Z, isn't so fortunate. She struggles financially after your death, eventually dying alone and destitute. As for your children, the ones who knew you only as Thomas Howard, they spend their lives in the shadow of your legend. Jesse Jr. becomes a lawyer, ironically enough spending his career on the side of law and order. He dies in 1951 at the age of 75. Your daughter Mary lives until 1935, bearing the burden of your notorious name. The Ford brothers thought killing you would bring them fame and fortune. Instead, it brought them infamy and death. Governor Crittenden thought your death would cement his political legacy. Instead, he's remembered primarily as the man who put a price on Jesse James's head. And you became more famous in death than you ever were in life. Books, movies, songs, the legend of Jesse James has outgrown the man himself, becoming part of American mythology. Were you a ruthless killer or a wronged Southern hero, a common criminal or a political rebel, a Robin Hood figure or a cold-blooded murderer? The answer, perhaps, is that you were all of these things and none of them. You were shaped by a war that tore your country apart, moulded by violence from a young age, driven by a sense of injustice that never left you. Like so many figures from history, your story changes depending on who's telling it. To some, you're a villain. To others, a hero. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between, complex, contradictory, and utterly human. But now, as you drift towards sleep, picture one last scene, not the violent end, but perhaps a quiet moment before it all went wrong. Maybe an evening by a campfire with Frank and the younger brothers, sharing a bottle and stories under a blanket of stars. Or a rare peaceful day at home with Z and the children, your guns set aside, just being Thomas Howard for a little while. In those moments, maybe you found some measure of peace in a life defined by violence, and maybe, just maybe, you sometimes wished you could have stayed there, in that quieter world, rather than riding off into the legend that would both immortalize and destroy you. The story of Jesse James doesn't end with a bullet to the back of his head on April 3rd, 1882. In some ways, that's where it really begins. Let's fast forward to the afternoon of Jesse's funeral. The sky is overcast, threatening rain. The crowd is so thick around the small farm cemetery that latecomers stand on tiptoes, craning their necks for a glimpse of the notorious outlaw's coffin. Among those watching with dry eyes is Zerelda Samuel, Jesse's mother, now missing her right arm thanks to the Pinkerton bomb. As they lower her son's body into the ground, Zerelda is already planning. She's a shrewd woman, this tough Missouri mother who raised guerrilla fighters. She understands something fundamental about America. We love our outlaws, especially dead ones. Within weeks, Zerelda turns the family farm into America's first criminal tourist attraction. For 25 cents, visitors can tour the property, see the room where Jesse grew up, hear stories about his exploits, carefully curated by Mama James to paint her son in the most favourable light. He was a good boy, she tells crowds of eager tourists. Forced into outlawry by Yankee persecution. For an extra fee, visitors can even take home a souvenir, a small stone from the grave, a splinter from the house siding, even leaves from trees Jesse supposedly climbed as a boy. When authentic items run out, Zerelda simply substitutes whatever's handy. The tourists never know the difference. You're basically looking at the birth of dark tourism in America, a historian once told me. Before Bonnie and Clyde, before Al Capone, Zerelda James created the template for turning criminality into cash. This commodification of Jesse's memory is just one aspect of how his legend grows after his death. The nation becomes obsessed with him in a way that's hard for us to comprehend today. Imagine if social media existed in 1882. Thus Jesse James would trend for months. Dime novels featuring wildly fictionalized versions of Jesse's exploits flood the market. In these cheap, sensationalized stories, Jesse becomes everything from a wronged Southern gentleman seeking justice to a Robin Hood figure robbing the rich and giving to the poor. The fact that there's zero historical evidence of Jesse ever giving stolen money to anyone outside his gang doesn't matter. The legend is more compelling than the truth. What made Jesse James so captivating to Americans? Why did his story stick when so many other outlaws faded from memory? Part of it was timing. Jesse's criminal career spanned the period historians call Reconstruction, that awkward, often brutal aftermath of the Civil War when America was trying to stitch itself back together. The South was occupied by Northern troops, Southern whites were stripped of political power, and the entire economic system of the region was being forcibly transformed. For many Southerners, Jesse James became a symbol of resistance to Northern domination. Each train he robbed, each bank he held up, was viewed not as a crime, but as an act of rebellion against Yankee oppressors. The fact that most of his victims were ordinary working people, not wealthy Northern industrialists, was conveniently overlooked. Jesse's like the world's greatest marketer, I remember a professor saying in a lecture about him. He convinced people he was robbing the big bad Yankees when he was mostly just robbing regular folks who had the bad luck to be on the wrong train. There's a story, probably apocryphal but telling nonetheless, about Jesse and his gang stopping to rob a stagecoach. Among the passengers is a Southern widow who begins to cry, saying the money in her purse is all she has in the world. According to the tale, Jesse not only refuses to take her money, but gives her $20 from his own pocket, tipping his hat gallantly before riding off. Did this actually happen? Almost certainly not, but stories like this spread like wildfire in the post-Civil War South, where people desperately needed heroes to restore their battered pride. The newspapers played their part too, particularly the Kansas City Times under the direction of John Newman Edwards. As we saw earlier, Edwards was essentially Jesse's publicist, printing his letters and crafting a heroic narrative around his crimes. This wasn't just personal friendship, it was political calculation. Edwards and other former Confederates used Jesse James as a weapon in the ongoing cultural civil war. Every bank robbery, every train heist became a symbolic strike against Northern Reconstruction policies. In their hands, Jesse wasn't a criminal, but a Confederate guerrilla who simply refused to surrender. The Ballad of Jesse James, written shortly after his death, captures this sentiment perfectly. Jesse James was a lad who killed many a man. He robbed the Glendale train, he stole from the rich and he gave to the poor. He'd a hand and a heart and a brain. That third line, he stole from the rich and he gave to the poor, is complete fiction, but it's stuck, becoming an essential part of the Jesse James mythology. Frank James's story after Jesse's death is fascinating in its own right. After surrendering to authorities, he's put on trial for murder and, surprisingly, acquitted. The juries, made up mostly of Southern sympathizers, simply refused to convict him despite overwhelming evidence. After his acquittal, Frank does something truly bizarre. He goes straight. This hardened guerrilla fighter and outlaw gets a series of honest jobs: ticket taker at a theatre, shoe salesman, and eventually a racetrack starter. He becomes a staple at county fairs and Wild West shows, where he sits in a tent and charges people a dime just to shake his hand. It's like if Osama bin Laden's brother got captured, acquitted on a technicality, and then opened a booth at the state fair where you could take selfies with him, a historian once told me. That's how weird this would seem in modern context. In these appearances, Frank carefully cultivates the James Gang myth, describing Jesse as a misunderstood hero driven to crime by persecution. When asked about specific robberies or murders, he becomes conveniently vague, neither confirming nor denying anything that might still be prosecutable. The most telling moment in Frank's post-outlaw career comes in 1903, when he's invited to a reunion of Quantrill's Raiders, the Confederate guerrilla band where both James brothers got their start. A photographer captures the moment. Old men with white beards, sitting stiffly in their Sunday suits, former terrorists reminiscing about the good old days of bushwhacking. In the photo, Frank looks uncomfortable, as if caught between his violent past and his respectable present. Within 15 years, all these former guerrillas have transformed from hunted outlaws to celebrated veterans, their atrocities rebranded as wartime heroism. This rehabilitation isn't unique to the James Gang. It's part of a larger pattern in how America processes its internal conflicts. By the early 1900s, the bloody realities of the Civil War and its aftermath were already being rewritten into a more palatable narrative of brother against brother, a tragic misunderstanding rather than a fundamental clash over whether humans could own other humans. In this revised history, Jesse James wasn't a terrorist who couldn't let go of a lost cause, but a dashing rebel fighting against oppression. The inconvenient details, the murdered civilians, the gratuitous violence, the innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire, fade away, leaving only the romantic outlaw. Robert Ford, Jesse's killer, experiences the opposite transformation in public memory. Despite collecting a reward for killing America's most wanted criminal, Ford finds himself universally reviled. The dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard follows him everywhere he goes. Ford tries to capitalize on his notoriety by recreating the murder in stage shows, standing before audiences to pantomime the shooting of Jesse James. Imagine how bizarre this must have been, paying to watch the actual murderer of Jesse James reenact the killing like some grotesque form of entertainment. But the shows don't make him rich. Instead, they cement his reputation as a backstabbing traitor. In saloons across America, men refuse to drink with him, turning their backs when he enters. Ford's name becomes synonymous with betrayal. "I thought I'd be a hero," Ford reportedly says toward the end of his life. "I only became a villain." When Edward O'Kelly shoots Ford dead in 1892, public reaction is essentially good riddance. O'Kelly instantly becomes a celebrity for killing the man who killed Jesse James, signing autographs in prison and receiving mountains of supportive mail. The fact that 7,000 people sign a petition for O'Kelly's release after he straight up murdered a man in cold blood tells you everything you need to know about how Jesse James had been transfigured in the public imagination. In death, he'd become untouchable, a secular saint of the lost Confederate cause. Let's talk about the crimes themselves for a minute, specifically the robberies that made Jesse famous. Bank and train robberies existed before the James Younger gang, but Jesse and his crew transformed them into something approaching an art form. Before Jesse, most bank robberies were crude affairs. Rush in, grab what you can, rush out. The James gang brought planning, coordination, and precision to their heists. They'd scout locations for days, noting guard patterns, identifying escape routes, and learning the habits of law enforcement in the area. During the robberies themselves, gang members had assigned roles, some securing the perimeter, others handling the employees, others emptying the safes. They developed techniques for controlling crowds, methods for quickly breaking into vaults, and systems for efficient getaways. They basically wrote the playbook that bank robbers would follow for the next century, an FBI historian once told me. John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, Bonnie and Clyde, they were all following the template Jesse James created. Their train robberies were even more innovative. Before the James Gang, the idea of stopping and robbing a moving train was almost unheard of. Jesse pioneered techniques like removing spikes from rails to cause derailments, using lanterns to signal false stops, and deploying multiple riders to surround passenger cars. These methods were so effective that railroads had to develop entirely new security systems in response. They hired armed guards for their express cars, installed larger, more secure safes, and created special locks that could only be opened at destination stations. The cat-and-mouse game between the James Gang and the railroads drove innovation on both sides. After several robberies where Jesse's men forced express managers to open safes at gunpoint, the railroads introduced time-lock safes that couldn't be opened en route, even by employees. Jesse's response? Start bringing nitroglycerin to blow the safes open. The railroads countered with reinforced steel safes. Jesse countered by targeting the passengers instead, and so it went. This pattern, crime leads to security, security leads to more sophisticated crime, continues to this day in everything from bank design to cybersecurity. In a weird way, we have Jesse James to thank for some of the fundamental security features we now take for granted. But perhaps the most significant innovation Jesse brought to American crime was public relations. He understood, at a gut level, that perception matters as much as reality. Through his letters to newspapers, his carefully crafted Robin Hood image, and his exploitation of post-Civil War political tensions, he created a template for the celebrity criminal. Jesse James was the first American outlaw who really understood branding, a criminologist explained to me. He wasn't just robbing banks, he was selling a story about why he was robbing them. This approach would be imitated by generations of American criminals, from Al Capone's portrayal of himself as a businessman providing services the government wouldn't allow, to John Dillinger's careful cultivation of a gentleman bandit image. Even modern drug lords who build hospitals or schools in poor neighborhoods are following Jesse's playbook. Do what you want, but make sure people see you as something more than just a criminal. The myth-making around Jesse James accelerates dramatically in the early 20th century with the arrival of a new medium, film. The first Jesse James movie appears in 1908, just 26 years after his death. Dozens more would follow, each taking greater liberties with the historical record. In 1939, 20th Century Fox releases Jesse James, starring Tyrone Power and Henry Fonda. The film portrays Jesse as a good-hearted farmer driven to outlawry by cruel railroad barons who kill his mother. Remember, in reality, Jesse's mother lived well into old age and died peacefully after a long career of selling fake outlaw souvenirs to tourists. The movie is a massive hit, cementing the heroic outlaw narrative in popular culture. Jesse is handsome, noble, and fundamentally decent, forced into crime by circumstances beyond his control rather than choosing it as a way to continue fighting a lost war. This whitewashed version of Jesse becomes the standard portrayal for decades. Audie Murphy, Robert Wagner, Robert Duvall, major stars line up to play the outlaw, almost always as a misunderstood hero rather than the complex, violent man he actually was. By the 1960s, Jesse James has been completely separated from his historical context. The Civil War origins of his criminal career fade into the background. The politically motivated terrorism of the bushwhacker years disappears entirely. What remains is simply a cool outlaw in a cowboy hat, robbing banks because that's what outlaws do. Only in the 2000s do we start to see more nuanced portrayals. Films like The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, 2007, begin to explore the darker aspects of the legend, the paranoia, the cruelty, the cold-blooded murders that were conveniently written out of the earlier accounts. Even now, though, Jesse James occupies a unique position in American culture, somewhere between historical figure and folkloric character. Like Johnny Appleseed or Paul Bunyan, the legend has so completely overshadowed the man that separating fact from fiction becomes nearly impossible. So, who was the real Jesse James? Not the Robin Hood of folklore or the misunderstood hero of early films, but also not simply the cold-blooded killer described by his enemies. He was a product of his time and place. Missouri during the Civil War, perhaps the most chaotic and violent corner of America during its most chaotic and violent period. He was a teenage guerrilla fighter who never really accepted that his side lost. He was a bank robber who found that his criminal acts could be justified, even celebrated, if he framed them as political resistance. Most of all, he was a man who created a myth so powerful that it continued to grow long after he was gone. In that sense, Jesse James's greatest heist wasn't any bank or train, it was American memory itself. He stole his way into our national mythology, and we've never quite managed to get the story straight since. But what about the personal side? The human being behind the legend? That's harder to access, but we get glimpses. Jesse as a father is a particularly intriguing aspect. His children, Jesse Jr. and Mary, grew up believing their father was Thomas Howard, a cattle buyer and small-time businessman. They learned his true identity only after his death, when they were suddenly thrust into the spotlight as the offspring of America's most notorious outlaw. Jesse Jr., just 7 when his father died, spent his life in an impossible position, trying to defend a father he barely knew while also distancing himself from that same father's crimes. He became a lawyer, as if trying to balance the legal scales his father had tipped so dramatically. In 1899, Jesse Jr. published a book titled Jesse James, My Father, attempting to humanize the outlaw. The book portrays Jesse Sr. as a loving family man forced into crime by persecution, never robbing the poor or mistreating women. It's clearly a son's attempt to reconcile the loving Thomas Howard he knew with the Jesse James the world talked about. Mary James, just 3 when her father was killed, had even fewer memories to hold on to. She spent her life navigating the strange celebrity that came with her name, neither fully embracing nor rejecting her father's legacy. Z. James, Jesse's widow, perhaps suffered the most in the aftermath. Left to raise 2 small children alone, she found that being the widow of Jesse James opened few doors. Despite the outlaw's legendary wealth, Z lived in near poverty after his death. The stolen riches either spent, hidden, or simply never as substantial as the legends claimed. There were rumours of buried treasure, of course. For decades after Jesse's death, farmers across Missouri and neighbouring states reported strange nighttime visitors digging up their fields, searching for Jesse's supposedly hidden loot. Nothing substantial was ever found. Whatever money Jesse stole, he seems to have spent or lost along the way. In 1900, Z gave an interview to a newspaper where she said, "I think sometimes that the worst punishment that could be inflicted on those who talk of the wonderful treasure my husband is supposed to have accumulated would be to compel them to live for a while on the pitiful income I have managed to exist on since his death." The image of Jesse counting his gold by candlelight or burying strong boxes of cash for future use is likely just another aspect of the myth. The reality was probably more mundane. The money went to living expenses, bribes for information, payments to supporters who hid them, and the considerable costs of staying on the run for years. The financial reality of the James gang's career punctures another aspect of the legend. Despite robbing dozens of banks and trains over a 16-year criminal career, Jesse died essentially broke. The take from most robberies was far less than the public imagined. The $60,000 from the Liberty Bank robbery was an outlier, with most heists netting just a few $1,000s that had to be split among gang members. Train robberies were particularly disappointing. The gang often spent weeks planning a heist that yielded less than $2,000. Split 5 or 6 ways, after expenses, a gang member might clear just a couple $100s for weeks of work and risk, hardly the massive scores depicted in films. This financial reality raises an obvious question. If the money wasn't that good, why keep robbing? For Jesse, at least, the answer seems clear. It wasn't about the money. It was about the cause, the continuation of the war by other means. It was about striking back at the system he believed had wronged him, his family, and the South. The money was secondary to the statement each robbery made. Every headline, every wanted poster, every reward notice was a reminder that the South might have surrendered, but Jesse James never would. This is what separates Jesse from the countless other Western outlaws of his era. Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, the Dalton Gang, they were criminals who happened to operate in a historical context. Jesse James was a historical actor who happened to use criminal methods. His outlawry was inseparable from the broader political struggles of his time. In that sense, he has more in common with political terrorists than with bank robbers. His criminal career can't be understood outside the context of the Civil War and Reconstruction. The banks and trains weren't just targets of opportunity. They were symbols of everything Jesse believed had gone wrong with America. Did Jesse see himself this way? Did he consciously style himself as a Confederate fighter continuing the war? Or did he simply fall into that role through circumstance and the helpful myth-making of allies like John Newman Edwards? We'll never know for sure. Jesse left no diary, no memoirs, no reflective letters pondering his motivations. What we have instead are his actions, the bloody trail he carved across the Midwest, and the testimonies of those who knew him, all filtered through their own biases and agendas. Perhaps the most telling clue comes from the Northfield robbery, that disastrous 1876 attempt to rob a bank in Minnesota that led to the destruction of the James Younger gang. Why Minnesota? Why travel hundreds of miles north, deep into enemy territory, when there were plenty of banks closer to home? Because the bank in Northfield was connected to Adelbert Ames and Benjamin Butler, prominent Union generals and Reconstruction politicians. It wasn't chosen for its money, but for its symbolism. Even when it meant greater risk, Jesse prioritized targets that allowed him to frame his crimes as political acts rather than simple theft. Jesse James was a man caught between worlds, between war and peace, between Confederate and American, between soldier and criminal. He never found his place in the post-war nation, never accepted that the cause he fought for was lost. In that sense, his story is tragically American, a man who couldn't let go of a fight that had already ended, couldn't find his way forward in a changed world. As you drift towards sleep, think about how easy it is for us to romanticize figures like Jesse James from the safety of our modern beds. We can admire the daring of his robberies, the boldness of his escapes, the mythology of the outlaw who defied authority. But remember too the real costs of his crusade, the express managers shot point blank, the innocent bystanders caught in crossfires, the widows and children left behind by his victims. Remember that for every legend about Jesse giving money to a poor farmer, there's a documented case of him killing an unarmed clerk who moved too slowly. The story of Jesse James isn't just about one man's refusal to surrender. It's about how we as Americans choose which stories to tell, which details to emphasize, and which uncomfortable truths to sweep aside in crafting our national mythology. In the quiet darkness of your bedroom, safe from the violence and chaos of Jesse's world, consider this: the legends we create say as much about us as they do about their subjects. What does our enduring fascination with outlaws like Jesse James reveal about America? That's a question worth pondering as you drift towards sleep. The day is blistering hot, the kind of Missouri summer heat that makes the air shimmer above the dirt roads. You've been riding since dawn, your shirt soaked through with sweat, the leather of your saddle creaking beneath you. This is your third different horse this week. You never keep one long enough for it to be recognized. Welcome to a day in the life of Jesse James, America's most wanted man. Living as an outlaw wasn't all dramatic shootouts and daring heists. Most of Jesse's life was spent in the mundane business of simply not getting caught, and in the late 1800s that was both easier and harder than you might think. People ask me if Jesse James could exist today. A historian once told me, could someone be that famous and still evade capture for 16 years? The answer is complicated. In some ways, Jesse had advantages we can barely imagine now. There were no photographs on file for most of the population, no fingerprint databases, no DNA testing, no real-time communication networks. If Jesse robbed a bank in Missouri on Monday, folks in the next county might not hear about it until Thursday's newspaper arrived. But he also faced challenges modern fugitives don't. The 19th century American was far less anonymous than we are today. Everyone knew their neighbours, especially in small towns. Strangers were immediately noticed and discussed. You couldn't just blend into a crowd. There weren't enough crowds to blend into. Howdy, stranger wasn't just a Western movie cliche. It was an information-gathering tool in communities where unfamiliar faces were rare and potentially threatening. Jesse's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. He didn't hide in shadows, he hid in plain sight. For much of his outlaw career, Jesse lived openly under assumed names in small towns and rural areas. He posed as a cattle buyer, a farmer, a businessman, respectable occupations that explained his occasional absences when he was actually off robbing banks, and his ready cash. In Nashville, where he lived for 3 years after the Northfield disaster, Jesse became Thomas Howard, a proper gentleman who attended church, chatted with neighbours about the weather, and never missed a Sunday dinner. His wife Z and their children lived with him, passing as a normal family. "Mornin', Mr. Howard," the local shopkeeper might say. "Fine day we're having," Jesse would reply, tipping his hat, perhaps with his gun belt concealed beneath his respectable frock coat. This wasn't just hiding, it was a complete alternate identity. Jesse didn't just change his name, he changed his accent, his mannerisms, his entire way of moving through the world. The wild, reckless guerrilla fighter became a soft-spoken family man who helped old ladies across muddy streets and discussed the price of wheat with fellow churchgoers. Frank James was even better at this transformation. During their Nashville years, Frank became B.J. Woodson, a shoe salesman so convincing that his neighbours were shocked when his true identity was later revealed. One described him as the quietest, most unassuming man you'd ever hope to meet. Think about that for a second. These men, whose faces adorned, wanted posters across multiple states who were the subjects of nationwide manhunts, were living openly among ordinary citizens who had no idea who they really were. How did they pull this off? Part of it was the Jameses' natural chameleon-like ability to adapt to different environments, a skill honed during their bushwhacker years when blending in could mean the difference between life and death. But they also had help. lots of it. The James boys maintained an extensive network of supporters throughout Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Some were former Confederate soldiers, others were family connections, many were simply Southern sympathizers who viewed helping Jesse as a way to thumb their noses at Northern authority. These supporters provided safe houses, fresh horses, supplies, and perhaps most crucially, information. They'd warn Jesse about lawmen in the area, suspicious strangers asking questions, or new wanted posters going up. If a Pinkerton detective so much as farted in western Missouri, Jesse would know about it within hours, one historian colourfully put it. His intelligence network was that good. This wasn't just casual help. These were people risking serious jail time to shield a known criminal. The bonds formed during the Civil War and its bitter aftermath created loyalties that transcended normal law-abiding behaviour. Clay County, Missouri, Jesse's home territory, was particularly steadfast in protecting its infamous native son. Local sheriffs conveniently looked the other way. Potential witnesses suddenly developed memory problems when questioned by authorities. Strangers asking too many questions about the James boys might find themselves escorted to the county line with firm suggestions not to return. One telling incident occurred when a Pinkerton detective was capturing in Clay County. The local sheriff, instead of assisting the detective, reportedly told him, "I'd get out of the county if I was you. These folks don't take kindly to men hunting Jesse. I can't guarantee your safety come nightfall." That was code for, "You're going to get lynched and I'm not going to stop it." The detective left. For Jesse, this support network was crucial, but it came with strings attached. He couldn't just be an outlaw, he had to be a political symbol, the embodiment of Southern resistance. Every robbery had to be framed as a blow against Northern oppression, not just a way to fill his pockets. When Jesse did need to travel between safe houses or to scout new targets, he employed tactics that would impress modern fugitive experts. He never took direct routes. He travelled at night when possible. He avoided main roads and public transportation. He frequently doubled back or took confusing, circuitous paths to throw off potential followers. He'd ride for miles up creek beds to avoid leaving tracks. "Man's like a ghost," a frustrated Pinkerton agent reportedly complained. "Leaves no trail a hound could follow." When Jesse did have to stay in public accommodations like hotels, he developed a system of early warning. He'd rent 2 adjoining rooms if possible, sleeping in the inner room while leaving the outer one seemingly occupied. He'd arrange furniture against doors and place objects that would make noise if disturbed, the 19th century equivalent of a primitive alarm system. Former gang members described how Jesse would sometimes enter a hotel through the front door, register under a false name, but then leave secretly through a back exit and sleep elsewhere. If lawmen raided the hotel looking for him, they'd find an empty bed while Jesse watched the commotion from a safe distance. Even his eating habits were calculated for security. He preferred to sit with his back to a wall facing the entrance. He would have someone else taste food first when possible, not just to check for poison, though that was a concern, but to establish a routine where he wasn't always the first to eat, a detail that might give him away to observant eyes. These weren't just the habits of a hunted man, they were the calculated strategies of someone who had turned evasion into an art form. Jesse wasn't just running, he was engaged in a chess match with authorities, always thinking several moves ahead. The most dangerous moments for any outlaw are immediately after a robbery, when the alarm is fresh and pursuit is hot. Jesse developed specific post-robbery protocols that were drilled into every gang member. First was the scatter principle. After a heist, the gang would split up and ride in different directions, only to rendezvous later at a predetermined location. This simple tactic confused pursuers and multiplied the territory they had to cover. "It's basic math," explained a former Texas Ranger I interviewed about historical manhunt techniques. "If you've got 6 riders going in 6 directions and you've got 20 pursuers, you can't put more than 3 or 4 men on each trail. Those aren't good odds for the pursuers." The gang also prepared multiple escape routes before each robbery, complete with cached supplies and fresh horses at strategic points. They'd study creek crossings, mountain passes, and other natural features that could help them evade pursuit. When a posse did get too close, the gang would employ what military strategists call a fix and flank maneuver. 1 or 2 riders would stay behind to delay pursuers with gunfire, the fix, while the others escaped in a different direction, the flank. The goal wasn't to win the firefight, but to buy time and confusion. All these tactics reflected Jesse's military background from his bushwhacker days. This wasn't random banditry, it was guerrilla warfare applied to crime. So, if Jesse was so good at evading capture, how did the authorities even try to catch him? Initially, the response to the James Younger gang was almost comically inadequate. Local sheriffs with limited jurisdictions and resources were simply outmatched. A sheriff from a small Missouri county might be a perfectly competent lawman for handling local troublemakers, but he wasn't equipped to track sophisticated outlaws who could cross county and state lines at will. Communication between law enforcement agencies was slow and often non-existent. A sheriff in Missouri had no easy way to coordinate with his counterpart in neighboring Iowa. Each jurisdiction guarded its authority jealously, making cooperation rare. This fragmented approach gave Jesse an enormous advantage. He could rob a bank in one county, cross into another jurisdiction within hours, and be effectively beyond reach of the original pursuing authorities. Imagine playing a game of tag where every 10 feet the person who's it has to stop and let someone else take over, but they're not allowed to tell the new person which way you ran, a law enforcement historian explained. That's basically how jurisdiction worked back then. The first real threat to Jesse's freedom came with the involvement of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, founded by Alan Pinkerton, a Scottish immigrant with a knack for detective work. The agency was essentially a private security force that filled the gap left by inadequate public law enforcement. The Pinkertons had made their reputation during the Civil War when Allen personally foiled an assassination plot against President Lincoln and went on to form the Union Intelligence Service, the precursor to the Secret Service. After the war, the agency specialized in hunting down criminals too sophisticated for local lawmen to handle. When the Adams Express Company and several railroads hired the Pinkertons to catch Jesse James, it marked a significant escalation. Suddenly, Jesse wasn't just facing bumbling local sheriffs, but a nationwide organization with resources, experience, and determination. The Pinkertons brought new techniques to the manhunt. They employed undercover operatives who would infiltrate communities where Jesse had connections. They compiled detailed physical descriptions and habits of the outlaws. They mapped family relationships and support networks. They offered substantial rewards for information. The Pinkertons invented many of the manhunting techniques we still use today, a retired FBI agent told me. Criminal profiling, informant networks, wanted posters with accurate likenesses. These were Pinkerton innovations. The agency was also willing to bend or break the law in pursuit of their targets. The raid on the James family farm, which resulted in the death of Jesse's half-brother and the maiming of his mother, was just the most notorious example of their aggressive tactics. Pinkerton agents would sometimes pose as reporters seeking interviews with Jesse's family members, hoping to extract information. They'd pay or threaten local merchants to report any large or unusual purchases that might indicate the gang's presence. They'd open mail addressed to suspected James allies, looking for clues. These methods were often illegal, but in the legal grey zone of the post-Civil War frontier, such niceties were often ignored in the name of results. The Pinkertons' aggressive approach had an unexpected consequence, though. It garnered sympathy for Jesse. When news broke about the bombing of the James family home and the injury to Jesse's mother, public opinion in Missouri swung dramatically in the outlaw's favour. Local newspapers that had previously condemned his robberies now portrayed him as the victim of northern aggression once again. The narrative that Jesse was a persecuted Confederate being hunted by ruthless Yankee agents gained new credence. John Newman Edwards, Jesse's media ally at the Kansas City Times, exploited this opportunity masterfully. In a series of editorials, he painted the Pinkertons as mercenaries willing to kill women and children to satisfy their northern paymasters. The bombing incident, Edwards wrote, proved everything Jesse had been saying about oppression and persecution. The Pinkertons eventually withdrew from the Jesse James case, their reputation damaged and their agents unable to penetrate the wall of silence that protected the outlaw in his home territory. It was a rare defeat for the usually successful agency. With the Pinkertons sidelined, the hunt for Jesse James entered a new phase. Missouri Governor Thomas Crittenden took a different approach. He decided to turn Jesse's greatest strength against him. Jesse's support network had always been his protection. Crittenden realised that to catch Jesse, he needed to break those bonds of loyalty. He couldn't do it with threats or force. That had already been tried and failed. Instead, he would use money, a lot of money. In 1881, Governor Crittenden arranged for the state legislature and several railroad and express companies to offer an unprecedented reward, $5,000 for the capture of Jesse James and another $5,000 if he was delivered dead rather than alive. In today's money, that's roughly $140,000, enough to tempt even the most loyal friend or ally. The reward was deliberately structured to encourage betrayal rather than capture. The message was clear: kill Jesse James and you'll never have to work again. This strategy played on a fundamental weakness in Jesse's position. Over the years, his original gang had been whittled down by death and capture. The men who now rode with him weren't his old war comrades who shared his Confederate loyalties. They were younger criminals, attracted by his fame, men who knew him as an outlaw boss, not as a comrade in arms. The newcomers didn't have the same ideological commitment, a historian explained. They were in it for the money, not the cause, and when someone offered them more money to betray Jesse than they could make riding with him, the calculation became simple. Robert Ford was exactly the kind of man Governor Crittenden's strategy was designed to reach: young, mercenary, and without the deep ties of loyalty that had protected Jesse for so long. While the authorities refined their manhunting techniques, Jesse was facing his own challenges. Life on the run takes a psychological toll, even for someone as seemingly adapted to it as Jesse James. By the late 1870s, after more than a decade as a fugitive, Jesse was showing signs of the strain. Former gang members described how he had become increasingly paranoid, suspecting betrayal everywhere, testing the loyalty of his men with arbitrary and sometimes cruel tests. One story tells of Jesse inviting a new gang member to go hunting. During the expedition, Jesse supposedly pointed out a distant farmer working in his field and said, "Prove yourself, shoot that man." When the recruit hesitated, Jesse allegedly drew his own gun, saying, "If you won't do it, I'll kill you then him." The terrified recruit fired but intentionally missed the farmer. Jesse laughed and holstered his weapon. "Just testing you," he said. If you'd killed him, I'd have shot you for being too cold-blooded. Whether this specific incident happened or not, it reflects the psychological reality of Jesse's later years, a man consumed by suspicion, constantly testing those around him, never able to fully trust anyone outside his immediate family. Even with his brother Frank, tensions developed. Frank, 5 years older than Jesse, had always been the more level-headed of the two. As they entered their 30s, Frank increasingly questioned the wisdom of continuing their outlaw career. "We've made our point," Frank reportedly told Jesse after the Northfield disaster. "Maybe it's time to truly disappear, not just hide." But Jesse couldn't let go. For him, surrender in any form was unthinkable. He had defined himself in opposition to authority for so long that he couldn't imagine any other way to live. This stubbornness created a rift between the brothers. After Nashville, Frank began to distance himself from active participation in robberies. Though he never completely abandoned his brother, he seemed to be trying to ease his way back toward normalcy, while Jesse drove himself deeper into outlawry. The physical toll matched the psychological one. Though only in his early 30s by the end of his life, contemporaries described Jesse as looking much older. The bullet lodged near his lung caused chronic pain that he increasingly treated with alcohol and laudanum, a tincture of opium commonly used as a painkiller in the 19th century. "He'd drink himself to sleep most nights," recalled one associate. Said it was the only way to quiet the voices in his head. Those voices might have been PTSD from his wartime experiences, the chronic pain of his injuries, or simply the accumulated stress of spending half his life as a hunted man. Whatever the cause, the carefree, laughing Jesse of earlier accounts had been replaced by a harder, grimmer figure. His family felt the strain as well. His wife Z had married a charismatic rebel. She found herself living with a moody, suspicious man who jumped at shadows and kept a gun under his pillow. Their children, Jesse Jr. and Mary, grew up with a father who was frequently absent and clearly troubled when present. They knew him only as Thomas Howard, never understanding why their family moved so often, or why their father sometimes disappeared for weeks at a time. Imagine the constant stress, a psychologist specializing in criminal behavior told me. Not just for Jesse, but for his wife and children. They lived with the unspoken knowledge that any day could bring disaster, capture, death, the destruction of their family. This stress likely contributed to the deterioration of Jesse's judgment in his final years. The robberies became less carefully planned, the escapes more narrow, the violence more gratuitous. He was burning out, making mistakes that the younger Jesse would have avoided. The decision to recruit the Ford brothers, particularly Robert Ford, a young man known for his instability and big talk, was perhaps the most fatal error. The careful vetting process Jesse had once used for new gang members seemed to have been abandoned in his desperation for loyal guns. It's almost as if, on some level, he was ready for it to end, suggested one biographer. Not consciously suicidal, but worn down to the point where the constant vigilance became too much to maintain. On that final morning, April 3rd, 1882, when Jesse removed his guns in the presence of the Ford brothers, was it simply a momentary lapse in his usual caution, or was it the action of a man exhausted by the weight of his own legend, perhaps ready on some subconscious level for the burden to be lifted? We'll never know. What we do know is that even in death, Jesse James continued to shape the American consciousness, his legend growing beyond any possibility of containment by mere historical fact. The manhunting techniques developed to catch Jesse James and his gang didn't die with him. They evolved into the foundation of modern law enforcement methods. The Pinkerton Agency's systematic approach to tracking fugitives, gathering intelligence, and coordinating across jurisdictions became a model for the early FBI when it was formed decades later. The wanted posters offering rewards for Jesse James were precursors to the FBI's famous 10 Most Wanted list. The network of informants and undercover operatives used to infiltrate Jesse's support system became standard practice in law enforcement. Even the psychological profiling attempts, the Pinkertons' efforts to understand Jesse's habits, preferences, and likely behavior patterns, foreshadowed the criminal profiling techniques that would become central to manhunting in the 20th century. When we hunt a fugitive today, a US Marshal once told me, we're still using methods that evolved from hunting Jesse James. The technology has changed, but many of the principles remain the same. As you lie in your comfortable bed, safe from the constant stress and danger that defined Jesse's existence, consider how different your life is from his. You don't scan every room for exits when you enter. You don't sleep with a gun under your pillow. You don't question whether every friendly face might be hiding betrayal. The luxury of trust, of safety, of simply belonging in the world around you. These were things Jesse James sacrificed when he chose the outlaw trail. Whether that choice was truly his or was forced upon him by circumstances is a question historians still debate. What's not debatable is the price he paid, not just in his violent death at 34, but in the quality of the life he lived before that bullet found him. Fame, yes. Wealth, occasionally, but never peace, never belonging, never the simple comfort of falling asleep without wondering if it might be the last time. As your own eyes grow heavy, appreciate that Jesse's story, for all its drama and excitement, is ultimately a cautionary tale. The outlaw path leads to nowhere but an early grave or a prison cell. The real freedom isn't in defying society's rules, but in finding your place within them. Something Jesse James, for all his daring and cunning, never managed to do. In the quiet darkness, as sleep begins to claim you, give a thought to those final moments in that small house in St. Joseph. Jesse straightening a picture, his back turned, vulnerable for perhaps the first time in years. Robert Ford raising his gun. The shot that ended the legend but birthed the myth. Then let the story go, drifting away like smoke from a distant campfire as you sink deeper into your pillow, safe in a world where Jesse James is nothing more than a story, fascinating, thrilling, but ultimately